The sky above the alien city was painted in shades of crimson and gold, as though the heavens themselves were burning. Beneath that sky stood the great arena, a structure of stone and steel that had seen more blood than rain. Its walls were carved, with symbols of conquest, and its gates opened only for those who were meant to fight, or those who were meant to die. The crowd gathered in thousands, voices blending into a single roar that shook the ground. The smell of smoke, sweat, and metal filled the air, carried by the wind into every corner of the city. This was not a place for mercy. This was a place where strength ruled and weakness was crushed. Marcus Hale walked into the arena with steady steps. His armor was not the polished kind worn by the alien warriors. It was patched together, dented, and scarred from countless battles. His boots left faint prints on the dust as he moved, each one carrying the weight of a soldier who had seen more wars than he cared to remember. He was human, and in this part of the galaxy, humans were rare. To many of the aliens watching, he was a curiosity, a creature of stories and whispers, known for fighting with a spirit that refused to break. Some in the crowd jeered at him, mocking his smaller frame compared to the towering figures of other species. But there were others who watched with quiet interest, wondering what he would do. Beside him stood Serenia. She was young, her features marked by the elegance of her alien race. Her skin carried a faint shimmer, her eyes large and bright like polished silver. She had once worn the robes of nobility, but now her clothes were torn, her wrists bound until moments before. Betrayed by those she trusted, she had been thrown into the arena not as a warrior but as a spectacle. Her people had expected her to break quickly, to serve as entertainment before the crowd. She looked at Marcus with confusion, unsure why a human soldier would share the same fate. The gates across the arena opened, and the challengers marched out. They were armed with long spears and bows that crackled with energy. Their armor gleamed under the sun, and their movements were sharp, trained for battle since childhood. The crowd roared louder, eager for blood. Marcus felt the sound sink into his bones, but he kept his eyes forward. He could feel Serenia trembling beside him, her breaths quick and shallow. "You stay behind me," Marcus said, his voice low, but steady. She looked at him, startled. "Why would you stand for me? You don't even know me." Marcus adjusted his grip on the broken blade he carried. It was jagged, chipped at the edges, but it was all he had. He did not take his eyes off the enemy as he answered. "Because you shouldn't die here, not like this." The first arrow was fired, a streak of blue light tearing across the air. Without thinking, Marcus stepped in front of Serenia, raising his arm to block. The arrow burned through his armor and pierced his flesh, but he did not fall. He gritted his teeth, forcing his body to move, to stand. Another arrow came, and again he turned his body, letting it strike him instead of her. Serenia gasped, her hands rising as if to reach for him, but she could not find the courage. The crowd cheered at the sight of blood, their voices rising in wild excitement. The enemy moved closer, arrows raining down in steady rhythm. Marcus became a shield, his body taking every strike that would have ended Serenia's life. Each impact sent waves of pain through him, but his stance never wavered. His legs were heavy, his arms trembling, yet his eyes burned with defiance. He fought not for glory, not for victory, but for the simple belief that one life was worth protecting. To him, it was enough. Serenia stared at him in disbelief. In her world, strength was power, and power was used to dominate. No one gave themselves for another. Sacrifice was weakness. Yet here was a human, bleeding for her, standing in front of death as though it meant nothing. Her heart pounded as she realized this was not weakness. It was something else, something she had never seen before. Marcus swung his broken blade, striking down one of the attackers who came too close. His movements were not elegant, but they were filled with raw force and determination. He fought like a man who refused to let go, even as blood poured from his wounds. The crowd, once mocking, now watched in silence. They had come to see a spectacle, but what they saw instead was a human who would not break, a warrior who carried pain like a banner. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across the arena floor. The fight was only beginning, but already Sirenia understood that something had changed. She looked at Marcus, his back straight despite the arrows buried in his flesh, and she felt a spark of something unfamiliar. Respect, admiration, and a growing fear of what it meant to see him fall. For the first time in her life, she prayed not for her own survival, but for his. The sound of arrows cutting through the air filled the arena like a storm of fire. The alien warriors loosed volley after volley, their movements precise, trained to overwhelm any enemy quickly. Each arrow carried burning energy that could pierce, through steel and flesh alike. The dust on the ground rose with every impact, mixing with the cries of the crowd. To them, this was nothing but entertainment, another display of power and dominance. Marcus stood his ground. His shoulders burned with pain, his chest heavy from the wounds, but he refused to step aside. Every arrow that came close to Sirenia, he intercepted. Some struck his arms, others his back, and a few dug deep into his side. His armor was breaking apart, pieces falling away with every movement. Blood ran down his body in thin lines, dark against the light of the alien sun. Still he held his broken blade firmly, his eyes locked on the enemies who kept advancing. Sirenia could not understand him. Her world had taught her that survival came first. Warriors fought for their own honor, for their own lives. To throw yourself in front of death for someone else was unthinkable. Yet Marcus did so again and again, without hesitation, as if his life mattered less than hers. She wanted to shout at him, to tell him to save himself, but the words would not come. She only stood there frozen, her silver eyes wide with shock and fear. Another arrow struck Marcus in the leg, forcing him down to one knee. The crowd erupted in cheers, convinced that the human had finally reached his limit. The alien warriors sneered as they drew closer, certain of their victory. One raised his spear, ready to finish the fight. Sirenia's breath caught in her throat, expecting to see Marcus collapse, but he did not. With a burst of strength, Marcus surged upward, swinging his broken blade with all the force left in his body. The strike was brutal and desperate, but it was enough. The alien spear shattered, and the warrior staggered backward in shock. The crowd gasped at the sight, their cheers turning into murmurs of surprise. No one had expected the human to rise again, not after taking so many wounds. Marcus's chest heaved as he fought for breath. His vision blurred, and every heartbeat sent fresh waves of pain through his body. Still, he did not fall. He looked back at Sirenia for a brief moment, his face pale but steady. "Stay behind me," he said again, his voice rough but unshaken. Sirenia's hands trembled. She had never seen such resolve in anyone before. Her people would have abandoned her to save themselves. Yet this human, a stranger, had chosen to bleed for her. Something stirred inside her heart, something she could not name, but it made her eyes burn and her chest ache. The alien warriors regrouped, their leader raising his hand to signal another attack. This time they moved in formation, their steps heavy, their arrows aimed to end it quickly. They had grown tired of the fight and wanted it over. The crowd leaned forward, eager to see the human finally collapse. Marcus gritted his teeth, forcing his battered body to move. He grabbed a fallen shield from the ground, dented and scorched, and raised it to protect Sirenia. Arrows slammed into it one after another, each strike rattling his bones. The force pushed him back, but he did not let go. He planted his feet, firmly, refusing to give an inch. With every arrow that struck, his strength seemed closer to breaking, yet his spirit only grew sharper. The alien spectators, who had mocked him moments ago, now watched in silence. They could not understand why he still stood, why he chose to fight when he had already lost so much blood. To them, it was madness. To Marcus, it was simple. No one deserved to die helplessly while he still had strength left to fight. At last, one of the alien warriors broke formation and rushed forward, spear in hand. Marcus shifted quickly, throwing the broken shield aside. With a sharp twist, he caught the spear with his injured arm, forcing it off balance, then drove his blade into the warrior's chest. The crowd roared with shock. Even wounded, the human had brought down another opponent. Sirenia's breath came in fast, uneven gasps. She could feel the energy in the arena changing. The spectators were no longer laughing at Marcus. They were watching him with something else, something like respect. She could see it in their faces, in the way their voices faltered when he refused to fall. Marcus stood tall again, blood running freely down his body, but his eyes still fierce. He was shaking, his strength nearly gone, yet he looked like a mountain, refusing to move. Serenia realized with sudden clarity that he was not fighting just to protect her. He was fighting to prove something greater, that a human, small and fragile compared to these warriors, could still stand against impossible odds. The alien leader narrowed his eyes, anger flashing across his face. This was no longer a simple fight. The human had turned their game of cruelty into something else, something that made the crowd question their own beliefs. With a roar, the leader drew his blade and stepped forward, ready to face Marcus himself. Serenia felt her heart pound louder than the cheers of the crowd. She had never prayed before, but now she whispered in her mind, begging for Marcus to survive. For the first time in her life, she wanted someone else to live more than herself. And as Marcus tightened his grip on the broken weapon, standing between her and death once more, she realized she would never forget this moment. The arena had grown strangely quiet. The chants of the crowd had softened into murmurs, as if even the spectators could not decide what they were witnessing. They had expected a quick display of dominance, the human collapsing under the endless assault, but instead they saw a man who refused to fall. The alien leader, taller and stronger than the rest, now stood at the edge of the battlefield with his blade drawn, his gaze fixed on Marcus. Marcus's breath came heavy and uneven. His body felt like a wall of pain, each wound screaming with every movement. His arm was weak, his leg throbbed from the arrow that had pierced it, and blood dripped steadily into the dust at his feet. Yet his eyes held the same fire they had from the start. He straightened his back as best he could, refusing to show weakness in front of his enemy. Serenia stood behind him, her hands clutched together, torn between fear and awe. She could hardly believe he was still standing. She had grown up watching warriors fight for honor, but they fought with the promise of reward or recognition. None of them would have risked this much for another. Marcus, however, was fighting for something she did not understand. Not victory, not pride. Something else. Something deeper. The alien leader stepped forward, his armor glinting under the dimming light of the sun. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never lost. The crowd stirred, their voices rising again, eager to see him finish the fight. He raised his weapon high, pointing it at Marcus. "You bleed too much to continue," he said, his voice loud and commanding. "Fall, human. Spare yourself more pain." Marcus said nothing. His lips pressed into a thin line as he lifted his broken blade. The edge was chipped, the hilt cracked, but he held it steady. He did not need words to answer. His defiance spoke louder than any voice could. The leader charged, his strikes fast and merciless. Marcus blocked as best he could, the impact of each blow sending sharp pain through his arms. Sparks flew as metal clashed against metal, the sound echoing across the arena. Marcus stumbled but caught himself, forcing his body to move even when it begged him to stop. He swung back, his attack, clumsy but filled with raw power. The leader dodged easily, smirking at the human's weakness. Serenia's heart raced as she watched the fight. She wanted to close her eyes, to look away, but she could not. Every time Marcus seemed about to fall, he rose again, like a flame, refusing to die. The crowd, too, began to feel the weight of the moment. Their cheers had turned into silence, their attention sharp and unblinking. The leader pressed harder, his strikes raining down like thunder. Marcus barely managed to parry, his movement slower with every passing second. Finally, the alien's blade cut across his shoulder, drawing a fresh line of blood. The crowd roared, believing the end was near. Serenia gasped, stepping forward, without thinking, but Marcus raised a hand slightly, motioning her to stay back. His eyes never left his opponent. Pain shot through him like fire, but he steadied his breath. He remembered battlefields far from this arena, remembered comrades who had fallen beside him, remembered promises he had made to never abandon the helpless. Those memories fueled him, gave him the strength to lift his weapon once more. With a sudden surge, he stepped forward instead of back, swinging with all the force left in him. The blow caught the leader by surprise. The broken blade struck his side, not deep enough to kill, but enough to make him stumble. The crowd gasped in shock. No one had ever touched their champion like that. The leader's eyes widened with anger, his pride wounded more than his body. He roared and attacked with renewed fury, determined to crush the human completely. Marcus braced himself. His arms shook violently, his vision blurred at the edges, but he kept moving. Each strike from the leader felt like a hammer, yet Marcus held on. Serena could feel tears in her eyes, her chest aching as she whispered to herself, willing him to endure. She did not know why it mattered so much, but the thought of him falling filled her with unbearable dread. The fight dragged on. Both warriors, locked in a storm of steel and willpower. Marcus knew he could not last much longer. His body was failing, every wound pulling him closer to the ground. But he also knew that every second he stood gave Serena another chance to live. That thought alone was enough to keep him moving. Finally, the leader raised his weapon high for a final strike. The arena fell silent, all eyes fixed on the moment. Marcus steadied himself, gripping his broken blade with both hands. His legs trembled, his arms weak, but his spirit was unbroken. As the blade came down, Marcus stepped forward instead of back, slamming his weapon against the leader's with a roar. The clash shook the ground, echoing across the arena. The leader staggered, his attack halted, and for the first time his confidence wavered. The crowd erupted into shouts, half in shock, half in awe. Marcus stood before him, bleeding, broken, yet still refusing to fall. Serena's breath caught as she realized what she was seeing. This was not just a fight. This was a human showing the galaxy something they had never understood. That true strength was not in power or dominance, but in the will to protect, to endure, to sacrifice. And in that moment, she swore to herself that if Marcus survived, she would never forget what he had shown her. She would make sure every scar he carried would mean something greater than pain. The arena floor was covered in dust, blood, and broken weapons. The alien leader stood back, glaring at Marcus with fury, while the human barely held himself upright. Every breath Marcus took sounded heavy, his chest rising and falling like a man carrying a mountain. His broken blade hung at his side, its edge dull and cracked. Still, his eyes never lost their fire. The crowd had grown restless. Some shouted for the leader to finish it, while others remained strangely quiet, their eyes fixed on Marcus. The human's defiance had changed something in the air. What was meant to be a quick show of power had turned into something none of them could explain. Serena's heart pounded as she watched Marcus sway on his feet. His body looked ready to collapse, but his spirit would not let him. She wanted to rush to him to help him, but she knew stepping into the fight would mean both their deaths. All she could do was watch, her silver eyes wide with fear and admiration. The alien leader let out a roar and charged again, determined to end it. His blade slashed with brutal force, each strike aimed to shatter Marcus completely. Marcus blocked the first blow, his arms shaking, but the second cut across his ribs, sending him stumbling backward. Blood spilled down his side, staining the dust. The crowd gasped, some cheering, others silent. Marcus fell to one knee, his broken blade resting against the ground. Pain screamed through every part of him, his vision flickering at the edges. He could feel his strength slipping away like sand through his fingers. The leader raised his weapon high, ready for the final strike. And then the sound of a horn echoed. Across the arena, the leader froze, his blade still raised. The crowd turned, confused, as armored figures appeared at the gates of the arena. They were soldiers from one of the noble houses, their banners flying high. A rebellion had broken out beyond the walls, and now the chaos had reached the heart of the city. The fight in the arena was forgotten as the soldiers poured in, clashing with the guards. Serena's eyes widened in recognition. These were her people, loyalists who had not betrayed her. She rushed forward and grabbed Marcus before he collapsed. His body was heavy, his breath shallow, but his eyes flicked open for a moment. You're safe, he muttered, his voice rough. She shook her head, tears in her eyes. No, you saved me. Stay with me, Marcus. Please. With great effort, she pulled his arm over her shoulders and began dragging him away from the arena floor. The chaos around them gave her cover. Soldiers clashing as shouts and steel filled the air. Marcus tried to move his legs, but his wounds were too deep. His weight slowed her down, yet she refused to let go. For every step she took, she whispered to herself, "He cannot die here." Behind them, the alien leader roared in anger, but he was swept away by the tide of battle as rebel soldiers pressed forward. Serenia guided Marcus through a narrow passage at the edge of the arena, leading him into the tunnels beneath. The air grew cooler and darker, the sound of the crowd fading into distant echoes. At last they reached a quiet chamber where the sounds of war could no longer reach. Serenia lowered Marcus onto a stone bench, her hands trembling as she looked at his wounds. Arrows still stuck out of his body, his armor broken beyond repair. She had never treated injuries before, but she could not stand idle. Tearing strips of cloth from her clothes, she pressed them against his wounds, trying to stop the bleeding. Marcus groaned, his eyes opening briefly. "You should leave me. You'll be safer without—" "Stop," she interrupted, her voice sharp for the first time. "Do not say that. You bled for me. You stood when no one else would. I will not abandon you now." Her hands worked quickly, though clumsy, her heart racing with every moment. She had always been told that humans were reckless, that they cared too much about things that did not matter. But as she looked at Marcus, pale and scarred, she realized they had been wrong. Humans cared because it gave them strength no other race understood. Serenia leaned close, her voice soft. "I swear to you, Marcus, if you live through this, I will make sure your scars are not wasted. I will make your sacrifice mean something." For a moment, Marcus managed a faint smile. His lips barely moved, but his eyes carried a spark of gratitude. Then exhaustion pulled him into darkness, his body finally surrendering to rest. Serenia sat beside him, refusing to leave. She listened to his shallow breathing, her hands never leaving his wounds. Around them, the world shook with the sounds of rebellion, but here in the silence of the tunnels, a promise was made. The young alien woman, once a noble kept in chains, had seen something no one in her world had ever shown her before. A human had chosen to take arrows for her, to bleed for someone he had just met. It was not weakness. It was not madness. It was strength of a kind her people could not imagine. And as she watched over Marcus, she knew she could never return to who she was before. The path ahead of her would be different now, shaped by the scars of a human soldier who refused to fall. Days passed since the chaos of the arena. Marcus lay in a quiet chamber deep within the stronghold of Serenia's loyalists. His wounds had been cleaned and wrapped with every bit of care they could give him. He was weak, often drifting between waking and sleep, but he lived. That alone was enough for Serenia. She stayed near him, watching over him whenever she could. The sight of his scars haunted her, yet it also strengthened her resolve. She had made a promise in the tunnels, and she meant to keep it. The man who had taken arrows for her, who had stood when no one else would, deserved more than silence and fading memory. Word of the arena had already begun to spread through the city. At first it was spoken of in whispers, carried from one servant to another, then from the servants to the streets. The human who stood against arrows. The human who would not fall. Stories grew with every telling. Some said he had caught the arrows with his bare hands. Others claimed his blood had burned brighter than fire. None of it mattered, because the truth alone was enough. A human had chosen to stand in front of death for another. Serenia used those whispers to her advantage. When she stepped into the council of her surviving kin, the other nobles expected her to be broken and afraid. They expected her to cling to their protection, to hide behind their power. Instead, she stood tall, her silver eyes burning with conviction. "You speak of strength," she told them, her voice steady. "You speak of honor and loyalty. Yet in the arena, it was not one of you who showed me those things. It was a human. A stranger, He shielded me with his own body when all others would have left me to die. The council muttered in disbelief, some scoffing, others uneasy. Humans were outsiders, mercenaries to be hired, nothing more. To call one a protector was unheard of, but Serenia would not let them dismiss it. You think sacrifice is weakness, she continued. I have seen with my own eyes that it is not. That human carried strength greater than all the warriors who mocked him. He fought when his body was broken. He bled until the earth drank his life. Yet he stood. And he stood not for himself, but for another. For me. Her words stirred the chamber. Some of the younger nobles shifted uneasily, their eyes lowering as if ashamed. The older ones scowled, unwilling to accept such a challenge to their beliefs. But Serenia had planted a seed. The story of Marcus, already alive in the streets, now reached the ears of those who ruled. When she returned to Marcus, he was awake, his breathing shallow but his eyes alert. He tried to sit up, wincing from the pain, but she gently pressed him back down. You should rest, she told him softly. His lips curved into a faint smile. Resting feels strange. I'm used to fighting. You fought enough, she said, her voice firm. Then after a pause, she added, Do you know what they call you now? The human who would not fall, the one who took the arrows. Marcus's brow furrowed. That's dramatic. It is true, she replied, her tone serious. You do not see what you've done, but I do. You've changed something in them. In me. He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes heavy, with exhaustion yet filled with quiet resolve. I didn't fight for glory, I fought because it was the right thing. Serenia nodded slowly. And that is why it matters. In the days that followed, Serenia worked tirelessly. She spread Marcus's story wherever she could, not with exaggeration, but with simple truth. She told the people how he had stood, how he had bled, how he had refused to fall even when death closed in. Her words carried weight because she had been there. She had seen it. And as her story spread, more began to believe. The people of the city, long ruled by fear and selfishness, began to whisper differently. Some looked at their own warriors and wondered why they had never seen such strength. Others began to admire the human, though they had never met him. To them, Marcus became more than a man. He became a symbol, and symbols had power. Not everyone welcomed it. There were those who felt threatened by the idea of a human being praised as a hero. The rival clans whispered among themselves, calling Marcus dangerous, a disruption to their order. They feared what might happen if others followed his example. Sacrifice, they said, would weaken them. But in their fear, they only spread the tale further. Marcus remained in recovery, his body slow to heal but his spirit restless. Serenia often sat beside him, speaking of the changes outside. At times he listened with disbelief, shaking his head as if the weight of it was too much. But she reminded him again and again that his scars were not just his own anymore. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the city in gold, Serenia looked at Marcus and spoke with quiet determination. I made an oath when I carried you from that arena. I swore your scars would not be wasted. And I will keep that promise. I will make sure what you did lives on, not just in stories, but in the hearts of my people. Marcus said nothing at first. He simply looked at her, the fire in his eyes dimmed but still alive. Finally, he gave a small nod. Then every scar will be worth it. Serenia held his gaze, her chest heavy with unspoken words. She knew the path ahead would not be easy. There would be battles to fight, both with swords and with ideas. But she also knew she was not alone anymore. She had seen the truth of human strength, and it had reshaped her forever. And so the legend of the man who had taken the arrows grew, carried by the voice of the one he had saved. The city had changed. What was once only whispers had now become open talk in the markets, the halls, and even the noble courts. People spoke of the human who would not fall, of the man who had taken the arrows. Marcus's name was carried on, the lips of strangers who had never seen him, and Serenia made sure the story did not fade. But such stories carried weight, and with weight came danger. The rival clans grew restless, uneasy with how much attention the tale was drawing. They called it a threat to their traditions, a challenge to the order they had kept for centuries. Some claimed Serenia had been bewitched by the human. Others accused her of using lies to gain sympathy. Yet no matter what they said, they could not erase the truth. Marcus had stood in the arena and survived what no one else would have dared. One evening, Serenia entered the chamber where Marcus rested. His wounds were healing, though scars now lined his body like a map of battles fought. He had begun to walk again, slow and unsteady, but with determination in every step. She found him practicing with a wooden staff, his movements clumsy at first, then sharper as he forced his body to obey. "You should still be resting," Serenia said, though there was no anger in her voice. Marcus lowered the staff, sweat glistening on his skin. "Resting won't prepare me for what's coming. You've stirred something out there, Serenia. Your people won't let it end with words." She nodded, her face solemn. "You're right. The rival clans are gathering. They fear what you represent. They want to crush the idea before it grows stronger." Marcus leaned on the staff, his breath steadying. "Then they'll come for you. For us." "Yes," she admitted softly. Then her voice hardened. "That is why I need you beside me, Marcus, not as a prisoner, not as a slave forced into the arena, but as my equal, my protector, my ally." For a moment, Marcus was silent. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. He had never asked for glory, never asked to be remembered. All he had wanted was to do what was right in the moment. Yet here she was, asking him to stand not just for her, but for an entire people. Finally, he gave a short nod. "If you stand, I'll stand with you." The days that followed were filled with preparation. Serenia rallied her loyalists, reminding them of what they had seen in the arena. She told them of Marcus's courage, of the way he had fought not for himself but for her and for something greater. Her words lit a fire in them, and even those who had once doubted began to see her vision. Marcus trained as best as his body, aloud, each scar a reminder of what he had already endured. When the rival clans finally moved, they came with armies. Their banners darkened the horizon, their warriors marching with weapons raised high. They believed Serenia's faction would crumble quickly, that her human protector would be little more than a fading story. But they were wrong. On the day of battle, Marcus stood at Serenia's side, armored once more, though the armor was patched and scarred like him. His blade was not perfect, but his grip was steady. The soldiers around him looked at him with awe, their faith drawn not from legends, but from the living man before them. Serenia, dressed in the armor of her house, raised her banner high. The clash came at sunrise. The battlefield erupted with the roar of warriors, the clash of steel, and the crack of energy weapons. Serenia fought with fierce precision, her blade, striking down those who sought to end her line. Marcus was never far from her side, moving with raw determination. His scars slowed him. His body protested with every motion, but he refused to yield. When enemy soldiers tried to strike Serenia from behind, Marcus intercepted, his blade cutting through their attack. When the tide pressed too hard against them, he pushed forward, a wall of willpower no arrow could break. The rival clans had expected him to fall quickly, but instead they saw him endure again and again, just as he had in the arena. The soldiers fighting beside him drew strength from his presence. Each time Marcus rose after being struck, they felt their own fear lessen. Each time he stood firm when others would have faltered, they pushed harder. The battlefield shifted, not because of numbers or weapons, but because one scarred human refused to break. Serenia saw it too. She fought fiercely, but she kept her eyes on Marcus, knowing that his strength gave her more courage than any weapon. Together they carved a path through the chaos, their movements different yet in harmony. Alien and human, noble and soldier, standing side by side, they became something greater than either alone. By midday, the rival clans began to falter. Their warriors hesitated, shaken by the human who would not fall and the noble woman who fought beside him. Their leaders shouted for them to press forward, but the doubt had already taken root. Against all odds, Serenya's forces held. Their spirits lifted higher with every moment Marcus remained standing. As the battle neared its end, Marcus stood in the center of the field, bloodied but unyielding. Serenya joined him, her banner raised high. Around them, the enemy began to retreat, their pride broken, their certainty shattered. The field fell silent except for the heavy breaths of the victors. Marcus lowered his blade, exhaustion weighing on him, but a faint smile touched his lips. He had kept his word. He had stood beside Serenya, not as a prisoner or a relic of pity, but as her equal. Serenya looked at him, her heart full. You gave them more than a victory, Marcus. You gave them hope. He met her gaze, his voice rough but steady. Then every scar was worth it. And in that moment, surrounded by the echoes of battle, both knew this was only the beginning. The smoke of battle still lingered in the air when the sun dipped low, painting the ruined fields in shades of red and gold. Serenya stood at the center of the quiet battlefield, her banner raised high. Around her, her soldiers tended to the wounded, their voices hushed with both exhaustion and awe. The enemy had been driven back. Victory was theirs. But it was not the banner alone that had carried them through the fire. It was the man who had stood beside her, the human who had taken arrows for her and still chosen to fight. Marcus, scarred and weary, leaned on his blade as he watched the field with steady eyes. His body was battered, his strength nearly spent, but he remained standing. For the soldiers, his presence was a symbol. They whispered as they moved past him, calling him unyielding, calling him the living proof of hope. The story that had begun in the arena was now alive on the battlefield, etched into the hearts of all who had seen him fight. Serenya approached, her silver armor gleaming beneath the fading light. She stopped before Marcus, her eyes soft, yet proud. It is done. They will not return soon. You gave them a reason to break. Marcus exhaled, his breath heavy. They'll come again. Pride does not die easily. Then let them come, she replied firmly. They will face more than just steel. They will face a people who now know what true strength looks like. The soldiers around them raised their heads, listening. Serenya's words carried weight, and Marcus knew she was no longer speaking only to him. She was speaking to all of them. That night, they returned to the city. Fires burned in celebration. Voices sang in triumph, and for the first time in years, the people looked not with fear, but with pride. They looked at Serenya as their leader, but their eyes often turned to Marcus, the stranger who had fought, for them as though they had always been his own. Days turned into weeks, and the rival clans grew quiet. Though they still muttered in anger, they did not attack again. Too many had seen the humans' defiance. Too many had begun to believe that sacrifice was not weakness, but power. They feared what would happen if the idea spread further. Marcus, though healed in body, carried his scars with him. They marked his arms, his chest, his back, silent reminders of every moment he had stood when others would have fallen. He never sought praise, never asked for honor. Yet wherever he walked, the people bowed their heads with respect. Children ran to see him, calling him the man who could not fall. Elders spoke his name with reverence, as though he had stepped out of legend. Serenya saw all this with quiet pride. But more than that, she saw the man himself, the one who had chosen to fight not for reward but because it was right. She knew the scars he bore were not only his, but shared with her and with all her people, and she refused to let them fade into forgotten history. One evening, she stood beside Marcus at the high balcony of her house overlooking the city below. The lights of celebration still flickered in the distance, though peace had begun to return. She spoke softly, her voice carrying the weight of her oath. You gave me my life, Marcus. You gave my people hope. I promised your scars would not be wasted, and I intend to keep that promise. Marcus turned to her, his face calm but tired. How will you keep it? By changing them, she answered. By leading with the strength you showed me. by reminding them that sacrifice is not weakness, and by ensuring that your name is never forgotten. He was silent for a moment, then gave a faint smile. I never wanted to be remembered. I only wanted to do what was right. And that, Serenia said, her eyes steady, is why you must be remembered. In the years that followed, Serenia's words became truth. She rose as a leader unlike any before her, one who spoke not of pride and power but of unity and sacrifice. Her people followed, inspired not by fear, but by hope. And at her side, always, was Marcus, the scarred human who had shown them a new way. Together they rebuilt what had been broken. The scars on Marcus's body became symbols, honored by the people as proof of endurance. Songs were sung of the arena, of the battlefield, of the moment he had stood before death and refused to fall. His story passed from one generation to the next, carried in both words and hearts. Marcus never sought the throne, nor titles, nor glory. He walked among the people as one of them, offering guidance when asked, strength when needed, and kindness, always. Yet even as he lived simply, his presence remained larger than life. Children grew up wanting to be like him. Warriors carried his spirit into battle, and leaders remembered his scars when they made choices. And Serenia, she kept her oath. Every decision she made as ruler was guided by the memory of the man who had once shielded her with his own body. She stood with him through triumph and struggle, never letting the bond they had forged in fire fade. Years later, when time finally began to weigh heavily on Marcus, Serenia stood beside him once more. She looked at the scars that had once been wounds and saw not pain, but the story of a life lived with courage. And as he looked at her, at the city that had changed because of him, at the people who now carried strength born from sacrifice, he whispered the words he had spoken long ago. Every scar was worth it, and indeed it was.